What if I told you that the world's most famous Turkish street food, the meat sandwich that defines Turkish food to most of the planet, wasn't actually invented in Turkey at all, but in Berlin, by a Turkish guest worker who put kebab meat into bread for the first time, so German factory workers could eat lunch on the go without a knife and fork? That the world's first coffee house, according to legend, opened in this city in 1475, 3 centuries before a single cafe existed anywhere in Europe? That a 600-year-old dessert refined inside the kitchens of an Ottoman sultan's palace is now protected by European Union law, the same way champagne or Parmesan cheese is, because one specific Turkish city makes it better than anywhere else on earth? Istanbul, where an empire's kitchen became the rest of the world's menu. This is the dish that requires you to sit down first. The döner, meat stacked on a vertical rotating spit, shaved off in thin slices as it cooks, absolutely has Turkish roots that go back to the 1800s. Written records credit a cook named Hamdi Usta in Kastamonu with tilting the traditional horizontal kebab spit vertical for the first time in 1835, and within a decade, a cook named Iskender Effendi in Bursa had independently developed a near-identical version that's still served today as the Iskender kebab, plated with rice, yogurt, and tomato sauce. This much is genuinely Turkish, genuinely old, and genuinely Istanbul's broader culinary region. But the doner kebab the entire world actually recognizes, meat, salad, and sauce stuffed into a flatbread, eaten standing up, walking down a street, was never served that way in Turkey until it came back from somewhere else. That sandwich format was developed in Berlin, not Istanbul, by Turkish guest workers who'd emigrated to West Germany during the 1960s labor recruitment drives. A man named Kadir Nurman, born in Istanbul in 1933, is the most widely credited name. After noticing that busy German workers near Berlin's Zoo train station had no fast portable lunch options, he packed traditional doner meat, onion, and lettuce into flatbread and started selling it from a small snack stand in 1972. He never patented the idea. Other claimants, including Mahmut Aygun, whose family still runs a kebab restaurant empire today, dispute the exact date and credit, and a guest worker named Nevzat Salim may have been selling something nearly identical in the small German town of Reutlingen as early as 1969. Nobody fully agrees, and Nurman himself never got rich off it. Legend holds that the world's first coffee house, Kivahan, opened in this city, then called Constantinople, in 1475, though no written record actually confirms it. What is documented is that the Ottoman Empire's first coffee houses opened in the mid-1500s, and within decades, coffee had become so central to the city's social fabric that Ottoman sultans took it seriously enough to occasionally try banning the coffee houses themselves, worried about what got discussed inside them. Turkish coffee is made by a method that hasn't fundamentally changed in 5 centuries. Extremely finely ground coffee, mixed directly with water and usually sugar, in a small copper pot called a sezve, brought slowly to a near boil over low heat, then poured unfiltered into a small cup, grounds and all, settling to the bottom as you drink. The foam on top is the mark of a coffee made correctly. The thick layer of sediment left in the cup at the end is traditionally read for fortune-telling, a practice called tasseography that turned finishing your coffee into a small ritual of its own. In 1683, Ottoman troops retreating from the failed siege of Vienna left sacks of coffee beans behind, one of the more direct, if accidental, routes by which Turkish coffee culture is credited with introducing coffee drinking to wider Europe. In 2013, UNESCO formally inscribed Turkish coffee culture onto its intangible cultural heritage list, citing its deep role in hospitality, proverbs, and social ritual. Today, you can find the centuries-old method served at Kuru Kahveci Mehmet Efendi near Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, where the line forms before you even spot the shop, drawn there by the smell alone. And in a detail that says everything about the drink's staying power, customer demand eventually forced Starbucks itself to add Turk kahvesi to the menu in every one of its more than 600 Turkish locations. Baklava's earliest roots reach back to the Byzantine period, before the Ottomans ever took the city, but the dessert as the world recognizes it today, paper-thin layers of phyllo, clarified butter, crushed pistachios, soaked in sugar syrup, was refined inside the imperial kitchens of Topkapi Palace during the 14th and 15th centuries, where the Sultan's own chefs had the time, the ingredients, and the royal incentive to perfect it. While Istanbul's palace kitchens get credit for refining the technique, the undisputed capital of Turkish baklava, today is Gaziantep, roughly 700 miles southeast. A city whose specific combination of high-quality local pistachios and notably dry climate produces a baklava that bakers and Turks alike consider unmatched anywhere else in the country, Istanbul included. The reputation is now legally protected. In 2013, the European Union granted Gaziantep baklavası its own protected geographical indication status, the same legal category that protects Champagne and Parmigiano Reggiano, meaning only baklava actually made in that region, with those specific Antep pistachios, can carry the name. Istanbul still consumes and produces enormous quantities of it regardless. Karakoy Gulyolu, a Istanbul institution, ships baklava daily to luxury retailers across Europe and the United States. And the proper way to eat a piece by local custom is upside down, bottom side against your palate first, so the syrup and clarified butter hit your tongue before the crunch of the pistachio-studded top layer. Walk anywhere in Istanbul in the morning and you will hear it before you see it. A vendor's cart, a stack of sesame-crusted bread rings, and the specific rhythmic call that simit sellers have used on these streets for centuries. A simit is a circular bread, twisted into a ring, coated in grape molasses and pressed into sesame seeds before baking. Crisp on the outside, slightly chewy within, often nicknamed Turkish bagel by visitors trying to find a familiar reference point, though the two breads developed independently. Historical illustrations from as early as 1714 depict street coffee vendors in the region carrying simit alongside their coffee pots, suggesting the bread and the coffee culture grew up together on these same streets, sold by the same vendors, for the same morning crowd. Today, simit carts, red, glass-cased, wheeled, are parked on nearly every Istanbul corner before sunrise, selling the bread plain or split and filled with cheese, olives, or jam for a few lira to commuters who eat it walking, exactly the way it's been eaten on these streets for generations. Börek is less a single dish than an entire category. Layers of thin yufka pastry, brushed with butter, wrapped or rolled or stacked around a filling, then baked or fried. And Istanbul's bakeries and home kitchens have built an entire breakfast culture around its variations. The most recognizable street version is sigara böreği, cigarette börek. Thin cylinders of yufka rolled tightly around a filling of cheese and parsley, then deep-fried until they crackle into a shape that genuinely resembles a cigarette, sold hot from bakery windows across the city. Su böreği, or water börek, takes the opposite approach. Sheets of dough are boiled before layering, producing a softer, more custard-like texture once baked with cheese or minced meat between the layers. Çiğ börek, a savory fried version particularly associated with Turkey's Tatar community, rounds out a category broad enough that an Istanbul bakery could serve a different börek every day of the month and never repeat itself. Turkey drinks more tea per capita than nearly any other country on earth. And in Istanbul specifically, çay is less a beverage choice than a social infrastructure, offered automatically the moment you sit down in a shop, a barber's chair, or a carpet dealer's back room, whether you asked for it or not. Çay is brewed in a specific two-tiered pot called a çaydanlık. A smaller pot of intensely strong tea concentrate sits stacked on top of a larger pot of boiling water, and the two are mixed together in the glass to the individual drinker's preferred strength. Koyu, dark, for someone who wants it strong, açık, light, for someone who doesn't. It's always served in a small tulip-shaped glass that lets you watch the color, never in a mug, and always with 2 cubes of sugar on the side rather than milk. The tea itself is grown almost entirely on Turkey's Black Sea coast around Rize, a region whose climate turned the country into one of the largest tea producers in the world within roughly a century. Remarkable, given that coffee, not tea, was the dominant Ottoman-era drink for centuries before tea cultivation took hold. Istanbul's çay bahçesi, tea gardens, often perched along the Bosphorus or tucked into a quiet square, remain one of the city's defining social institutions, where a single glass of tea can anchor an hour or more of conversation, refilled continuously for almost no cost. Along Istanbul's waterfront streets, particularly in neighborhoods like Karakoy and around the ferry terminals, vendors push small carts piled with mussels stacked in their shells, each one stuffed and ready. Midye dolma is a black mussel shell packed with seasoned rice, cooked with onion, currants, pine nuts, and a blend of Ottoman-era spices including cinnamon and allspice, served cold or just warmed, eaten by prying the shell open slightly with one hand and using the other half of the shell as a makeshift scoop, finished with a squeeze of lemon. It's pure street food, cheap, fast, eaten standing at the cart, the empty shells discarded straight onto the street or into a small bag the vendor hands over. The dish reflects Istanbul's identity as a city built on two straits and a sea. The Bosphorus, the Sea of Marmara, the Golden Horn, where shellfish have always been immediately available and immediately cheap, turned by Ottoman-era kitchen tradition into something more architecturally specific than a simple steamed mussel. A built dish, stuffed and composed, sold from a cart for the price of a few lira. This is the dessert that performs for you before you eat it. Künefe is built from kadayıf, fine, shredded phyllo-like pastry threads, packed into a small copper pan, layered with a soft, unsalted, slightly stretchy cheese in the center, then baked or pan-fried until the exterior threads turn deeply golden and crisp while the cheese inside melts completely. It arrives at the table still hot, drenched in sugar syrup, and the dish only finishes when you cut into it and the molten cheese stretches and pulls between the crisp pastry layers. The same visual signature that makes künefe one of the most photographed desserts in Istanbul's dessert districts. It's traditionally associated with the southeastern city of Hatay, rather than Istanbul itself. But the capital's dessert shops, particularly the dense cluster of künefe specialists around Eminönü and the historic peninsula, serve it constantly enough, and to enough tourists who've never encountered it, that it's become one of the dishes most associated with an Istanbul dessert crawl, regardless of where it actually originated. Lahmacun is sometimes called Turkish pizza by visitors trying to find a quick comparison, and the comparison genuinely irritates people who actually know the dish, because lahmacun predates the idea of pizza toppings by centuries and works on entirely different logic. A thin, hand-stretched dough, much thinner than any pizza crust, is spread with a paste of minced lamb or beef, mixed with tomato, pepper, garlic, and onion, pressed directly into the dough rather than layered on top, then baked at extremely high heat for only a minute or two until the edges crisp and curl while the center stays soft. It's served rolled around fresh parsley, onion, and a squeeze of lemon, eaten folded in the hand rather than cut into slices. Fast food in the truest sense, designed to be assembled, baked, and eaten within minutes at a street stand or small lahmacun specialist. The dish traces to southeastern Anatolia, particularly the Gaziantep and Şanlıurfa region. But Istanbul's enormous internal migration over the 20th century, as people from across the country moved to the city for work, brought lahmacun stands into nearly every neighborhood, making it as much an Istanbul street food today as a regional one. Istanbul's food culture was never built by one empire or one century. It was assembled, layer by layer, by Byzantine bakers and Ottoman palace chefs, and Black Sea tea farmers and street vendors calling out the same Simit cry for centuries, and then, improbably, completed in part by Turkish guest workers standing on a Berlin sidewalk in the 1970s, inventing the version of their own national dish that the rest of the world would actually come to know first. The baklava that Topkapi Palace's chefs refined for sultans is now protected by the same European law that protects champagne. The coffeehouse tradition that may have started here in 1475 forced Starbucks itself to change its menu 5 centuries later. The donor, the entire planet associates with Turkey, had to detour through a Berlin train station and back before Istanbul's own streets were selling it in sandwich form. Not every city's most famous street food was technically invented somewhere else, then re-imported and embraced anyway. Not every city has a dessert tradition with its own EU-protected geographical trademark. Not every city's coffee ritual is old enough that the foam on top has its own name and the grounds at the bottom get read like tea leaves.